Being a landlord comes with challenges. Most people just accept that sometimes tenants can fall behind on rent. But what happens when a tenant doesn't just fall behind? They disappear. They stop paying rent, leave the property damaged, and suddenly you're dealing with repairs, cleaning, insurance claims, and trying to track down a runner. All while the rent has completely stopped. That's when a lot of landlords assume their loss of rent cover will step in. But in many cases, it doesn't. At least not in the way that they expect. Because whether you're covered depends on why the rent stopped, how the damage occurred, and what type of cover you actually have in place. Hi, I'm Leslie from Duo Insurance, helping Australian property investors protect their rental properties. For most landlords, rental income isn't just extra money. It's what pays the mortgage, the council rates, the strata fees, and the ongoing maintenance that comes with owning an investment property. These costs don't stop just because the rent does. And when a tenant stops paying, or the property can't be rented because it's been damaged, the financial pressure builds fast, especially if repairs take weeks or even months. That's why understanding how loss of rent actually works isn't just about insurance. It's about protecting your cash flow and knowing where your biggest financial risks really sit as a property investor. So let's clear up the first big point. Loss of rent cover is designed to replace your rental income when your property can't be legally or safely lived in because of an insured event. In plain terms, if something like a fire, storms, floods, or serious damage makes the property uninhabitable, your insurer may step in and pay the rent you would have received while repairs are carried out. This is what loss of rent is really about. It's not about vacancy. It's not about the market, and it's not about a tenant choosing not to pay. It's specifically about the property being unlivable due to insured damage. Loss of rent usually applies when an insured event directly stops the property from being rented. For example, if a fire damages a structure, a severe storm causes major water damage, or a falling tree makes the property unsafe, the insurer may cover the rent you lose while repairs are completed. In these situations, the tenant typically has to move out because the property can't be legally occupied. And that's the trigger, not the tenant leaving, but the property being uninhabitable. Uninhabitable generally means the property is unsafe, lacks essential services, or can't be lawfully lived in under local regulations. If those conditions are met, the insurer pays loss of rent for the reasonable period needed to repair or rebuild up to the limits set out in your policy. This is the part that trips a lot of landlords. Loss of rent does not apply just because rent stops coming in. If a tenant falls behind, becomes a runner, or stops paying rent but the property is still livable, loss of rent usually won't apply. That situation sits under rent default cover, which is often an optional add-on, not part of the standard loss of rent. It also doesn't cover ordinary vacancy. If a tenant moves out and the property is empty while you look for a new one, that's not an insured loss. And if the damage is caused by poor maintenance, wear and tear, or pre-existing issues, insurers can decline both the damage claim and the loss of rent that goes with it. This is why the cause of the loss matters, just as much as the loss itself. This is where a lot of confusion comes from. So let's simplify it. Loss of rent is about the property. Rent default is about the tenant. Loss of rent applies when the property can't be lived in because of insured damage, like fire, storm, flood, or serious malicious damage. Rent default applies when a tenant stops paying rent, but is still living in the property or has left owing rent. That's the cover that helps when you're dealing with arrears, eviction, or chasing unpaid rent after a tenant disappears. Not every landlord insurance policy includes rent default automatically. In many cases, it's an optional add-on with its own limits, waiting periods, and conditions. So if your tenant stops paying, but the property is still habitable, loss of rent won't step in. Rent default cover may, but only if you've actually included it. Even when a loss of rent does apply, it doesn't mean payments start straight away or continue forever. Most policies have a waiting period. That's the time you have to absorb the rental loss before the insurer starts paying, and depending on the policy, that could be days or even weeks. Then, there are benefit limits. Insurers usually pay loss of rent for the reasonable repair period, but only up to a maximum time or a dollar amount. Once that limit is reached, the payments stop, even if repairs are still ongoing. Insurers also expect landlords to take reasonable steps to minimize the loss. That means arranging repairs promptly and avoiding unnecessary delays. If repairs drag out because of inaction, payments can be reduced or even stopped. Have you ever dealt with loss of rent or a tenant default as a landlord? Maybe a tenant stopped paying, became a runner, or damage meant the property couldn't be rented for a while. If that sounds familiar, share what happened in the comments. These situations can catch a lot of landlords off guard, and hearing real experiences helps others know what to watch out for. To recap, landlord insurance can cover loss of rent, but only when the loss is caused by an insured event and the policy conditions are met. It doesn't automatically cover every situation where rent stops, especially when tenant behavior is involved. That's why knowing the difference between loss of rent and rent default, understanding waiting periods, and checking benefit limits matters before something goes wrong. If you're not completely sure what your current policy actually covers, now is the right time to check, not after you're already dealing with a claim. Insurance shouldn't be something you only understand when a claim gets denied. It should be clear before you ever need to rely on it. If this video helped clarify how loss of rent really works, give it a like and subscribe for more clear practical guidance for landlords.